Next up, I would love and I'm so excited to introduce this very, very special guest, John Chambers. Chairman Emeritus and former CEO of Cisco Systems, he spent 20 years running the networking giant that has started a new self-funded venture capital firm, JZ2 Ventures, and investing in the Internet of Things, digital, communication, security, and agriculture. Interviewing John will be Anis Uzzaman. Can we please give a warm welcome for John and Anis?
I can't wait till I get you on the floor, good looking. Hey, going hot, so hot, just like an oven. And I'll burn myself, I just had to touch it. But it's so fine.
Hello, everyone. I think, finally we have John Chambers here. So round of applause for John.
Thank you. Thank you.
So John, why are you here? What made you to come to Startup World Cup?
Because you asked me.
Oh.
But all kidding aside, I am here because you asked me and you shared what you were doing. I'm a huge believer that startups are the primary vehicle for innovation for the next 2 decades. And the startups will do almost all the job creation. The large companies will probably, because of digitization and artificial intelligence and the transformation in business models they're going to go through, not add headcount for the next decades.
Yes.
And so it comes down to, if we don't get a lot more startups going, not only will we not have the job creation, we won't get the average household incomes going up, et cetera. So I think you are the future. And when I looked in terms of the mix, that it was a total global audience, that got me even more excited, because there are no entitlement. It's about how organizations change and how do you do this on a global basis. So it's a chance to share some views. It's a chance to really thank you for what you're doing. And most important, I think it's a chance also to share lessons learned. Over my 40 years in business, I've made about every mistake imaginable and done a couple things pretty well. And so I often try to put myself in your position in terms of what would you walk away from this session with. And if you walk away with 1 or 2 points, you will do something different and that are value to, I've achieved my goal. If you agree with everything I've said, I've failed. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you so much. So I want to go back to John's history. I think you know that he was the Chairman and CEO of Cisco for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. And by the way, John used to be in the sales. And when he became the CEO in 1995, between 1995 and 2015, you grew the company's revenue from 70 million to $47 billion. How did you do that? I think someone was clapping.
Yeah. So there's no substitute for being in the right market at the right time. And so put it in terms that I think are really relevant for each of you, you want to focus on market transitions, not your competition. And you want to get your timing on your market transitions so that you have a chance to differentiate yourself versus your peers, either by geography, or by product capability, or by distribution capacity, or by producing outcomes for your customers in a unique way. And so what we did so well at Cisco, and I came from a background of IBM, which was the company that when I joined them in the late 70s was on top of the world.
I also joined IBM as my first job.
But both of us have no longer white shirts.
Yes, we do not.
That's a little bit of humor between IBMers. You'll get used to my humor over time. But when you really watch, you see what happens when IBM did not transition from mainframes and got too far away from their customers. When Wang Laboratories, my next company, Dr. Wang was the most brilliant man I've ever met in my life. And he brought us through 30 years of transitions, but he missed the transition from mini computers to the PC and the internet and software, and 32,000 people lost their jobs. And so when you watch what we did so well at Cisco, is we focused on market transitions. Routing originally, the internet changing the way you work, live, learn, and play, switching become a part of that, movement into voice, movement into everything going over the internet, and we created replicatable processes that allowed us to move with tremendous speed. Mm-hmm. And many of us, and when I was your age and starting Cisco for growth, I originally thought process is bureaucracy. It slows me down.
Yes.
That's what the big companies do. They get them in trouble. And I was wrong. Process, if it's replicatable and done with focus on speed, is what allows you to accomplish goals your peers do not. So it is that approach to being customer-driven, getting market transitions right, extremely aggressive approach to the market. I don't enter a market where I couldn't get 40% market share, even though the barriers to entry are very low. And then we say, how do we get this replicatable pattern at a speed that others could not do? We had a lot of good competitors. Candidly, some of them at times had better products. But we out-executed them in terms of consistency of our customers' views and how we produced outcomes for them.
I know that you definitely had a lot of competition, especially I need to talk here about Chinese competition, right? Huawei, for example, was one of your tough competition. How did you win over them? How did you beat them in some sense?
Well, if you watch the battle with Huawei is still ongoing.
Okay.
But if you talk about each generation of competitors, what we did that our peers did not do is they came at us with single products. And so we had a bunch of router competitors, we had a bunch of switch competitors, et cetera. We got our products to play together at a speed that the customers can implement and produce the outcomes quicker than our peers. We developed a world-class killer sales organization. I mean, really good. And they were tough, and we win most of the time with the sales organization. And then we also had a tremendous customer support organization to where we not only were very profitable in customer service, more profitable than anybody else, but we had the #1 customer service. So our customers trusted us to get outcomes there. But if I'd say the one thing that allowed us to win most of all was our culture. And when I was young to Cisco and young to the business as a whole, I didn't put much value on culture. You know, that was something that maybe you evolve in over time, and I was very wrong. You never see a great, successful company without an unbelievable strong culture. You may or may not like the culture of an IBM or Cisco or an Intel or an Uber or a Facebook, but you never find a company that is really great without strengths. So when I look at what the young leaders in this room, and I always try to put it in your terms, I think leaders only have 4 jobs. Vision and strategy for your company, develop, recruit, retain, and evolve the leadership team, culture, and communications. So the 4th element of what allowed Cisco to break away from our peers, unbelievably strong culture, which included a culture of giving back. And I echo my colleagues that were on stage earlier. Many people think of corporate social responsibility as an afterthought. Cisco has won almost every single corporate social responsibility award there is, whether it's in this country, the Middle East, Asia, China, India, et cetera. And interesting enough, wherever we're #1 in corporate social responsibility, we're #1 in market share. So doing the right thing is not only good to do, it's good for business as well as changing the world.
Thank you so much. I'm going to talk about startups because this room is full of a lot of entrepreneurs from global market. So we have about people from at least 27 countries here.
Congratulations.
And we want to know, one of the biggest hurdle for most of the startup is to monetize their product and technology.
Yes.
So my question is, at what level of the startup's life cycle they should monetize?
Gotcha. Just to give you a little bit of background, I've acquired 180 companies. I probably talk to each month anywhere from as few as 300 startups to as many as 10,000 startups, either in large groups or individual groups. And I think it's so important as a startup, you understand first what market transition you're focused on. Secondly, what's your differentiation? Third, how do you meet customer expectations? But fourth, you got to think about how you make money. And if you're not able to get financial returns, you can't give your employees raises, you can't invest in R&D at the level you need. So I actually think you think about monetizing from the very beginning. You want to be realistic, however, where your peers are. And if you're following leaders already in the field, they've already set the expectations on prices. And so you've got to think, what is your competitive environment? When do you focus on not just the number of eyeballs, but how do you monetize that? But if I were to say what will cause the majority of companies to fail in this room, will be you didn't focus on your differentiation and market transitions and you didn't learn how to monetize your company and you run out of cash. It's as simple as that. Cash is the symptom. The real issue is you didn't move aggressively early enough to earn the value from your customers that you could charge a good return.
Perfect.
I know other people might disagree, but unless you got VCs behind you with unbelievable deep pockets, you want to think about monetizing as soon as you can and do it in a way that's a win-win for your customer.
That's correct. I know that there are a lot of entrepreneurs, they always complain that they also want to grow the business, and as a part of growing business, they want to have partnerships with large corporations.
Yes.
And you were on that side for most of your life.
Yes.
Now you are a venture capitalist.
Yes.
So what do these startups need to do to have a partnership with large corporations like IBM or Cisco?
Gotcha. How many people in this room have partnered with a large company? How successful was it? Very successful. You're the exception. When you partner with a large company that has 10 or 20 or $40 billion in sales, and you're generating $20 million between you, $20 million is a lot of money for you, right? How much is it for the large company? Peanuts. So you don't have strategic partnerships with large companies unless you have something they badly need for a sustainable approach. You have tactical partnerships with them. So when you partner with large companies, you've got to understand where you can help them achieve their goals. And be realistic. If your dollar revenues are pretty small, it's not going to move their top line. So you want to focus on what's the benefit for them. Does it help them achieve their other goals? You want to understand whether this is temporary or not. You want to understand, do these large companies have the capability to truly work with small companies? Because one of the dangers is these large companies will bleed you dry. You'll bring your R&D resources into them. They'll have continuous pilots. You think that you're about to get an order, and a year later you think you're about to get an order, and you chew up a huge amount of your R&D. So if you're selling to large companies, you want to be realistic on what are their expectations, what's the differentiation, and how do you bring value to them. But don't fall into the trap of thinking that you're going to have a real strategic partnership with a large company unless you're moving their top line and bottom line strategically. So you have tactical relationships. Be realistic when you sell to your large companies, whether it's in China, whether it's in the US, or in France or Germany. There are certain large companies that know how to work very effectively with startups, and there are others that have no idea. So when you start to sell to those companies and develop that tactical partnership, be realistic. Is this a company that knows how to do this? And ask them, who are the best other, quote, partnerships they have with startups to see what they're like. Having said that, if you're selling to enterprise, you want to get close to your enterprise customers. You want them to drive your direction and to be able to say, here's where your products need to go. So when I think about investing or acquiring a company, you know who I go to first? Their customers. And I say, what value does this company bring to you? How successful are they in meeting your expectations? What do you think they'll be able to do in the future, and do you trust them? And are they really focused on your success? So I don't acquire a company unless my customers told me to acquire them. And in today's world, I don't invest in a company unless I can touch their lighthouse customers and say, what do you want out of this relationship? And is there a really strong basis on the enterprise? It's a nice way of saying get very close to your customers, but be realistic. You're tactical to them most all the time.
Startup guys, is it helping? Yes? Perfect. All right. So I'm going to ask him another tough question, okay? So one of the biggest problems.
Now, you know how you handle tough questions, lessons learned? What you do is, if it's a really tough question that is emotional, how do you deal with it? With facts. If it's a really tough question with facts, how do you deal with it? With emotion. And then when you're about to get a tough question and you see it coming, what you do is you get closer to the person about to ask you the question. You look them in the eyes. You make them feel guilty. You don't want to put me on the spot here in front of 2,000 people. And I'm doing a good job for you. I'm here to help you. Now, what was the question?
Oh. I'm going to take my distance.
So you learn how to do that. It doesn't matter if you're dealing with the press. It doesn't matter if you're dealing with tough customers, etc. They are people also, so connect on a people basis. And even though it sounds funny, tough questions that are emotional deal with facts. Tough questions that are facts deal with it emotionally. So go ahead.
So I'm going to not look at his eyes, okay? So one thing that John did, and this is one of the toughest problems in the life cycle of a startup, is to get it bought or acquired by a large corporation. You grow the company, not most of the companies are going for an IPO.
Yes.
So they have to get bought by a large corporation and have a partnership with the large corporations. And by the way, John, between 1995 and 2015, he bought 180 companies. So let's ask him what he sees in a startup when he bought those companies, and now he is a VC, what he will advise to you so that your company can get bought by some of these large corporations like Cisco and IBM.
So it goes back to the concept we talked about earlier. I believe in looking for a replicatable process, whether it's how I acquire companies or whether it's where I invest in startups, etc. And if I do that right, instead of slowing you down, it speeds up the ability to make that decision and dramatically increases the probability of success. So in acquisitions, my rule was very simple. Did the acquisition target and Cisco have a very similar view of where the market was going to go and the role the acquisition target would play in it? Secondly, and this will shock you, was the acquisition target culture pretty similar to Cisco? Because if your cultures are not similar, what happens? When you combine, you bump into each other, and then you lose what you bought. Because when you acquire a company, and remember that every company in the future will be a tech company first, maybe specializing in insurance or banking or whatever, it is all about holding the people. And if you don't match cultures and a common vision of where the market's going, what happens? You lose the people. The average acquisition in our industry has attrition probably of 20% per year over the next 4 years after the acquisition is done. Our voluntary attrition at Cisco over 20 years was 4%. So understand what you're acquiring, which is people and next generation product, and you hold them. Then I look at, can they help me move my top line? Do they fit in strategically? Because acquisitions, 90% of them will fail in this industry. 90%. If you measure it in terms of, did you get the next generation product out? Did you gain market share? Was it a really good turn for your shareholders? Did your customers really appreciate the value, etc.? So I went in saying, we're going to do better than others, but 1 out of 3 is going to fail. And they did. And so I went in expecting a certain failure rate, but this replicatable process. And then I had the 7 golden rules, which we followed very tightly. And we then executed with a speed that others could not. I could get a call on a Wednesday night from the head of the NASDAQ exchange and say, John, you're an idiot. I said, okay, tell me why. And they said, you're about to miss one of the good acquisitions you should do of a company called XYZ. And I was embarrassed because I didn't even know who they were. They said, your competitors have been in there for 6 and 12 months, and you need to buy this company. I met with them the next morning with my head of business development, Friday morning. I did not know what they did at that time. And by Monday morning, we'd acquired the company for $3.2 billion through both boards of directors, wow, etc. Now that's an acquisition machine. So what do you need to do if you want to be acquired? How many of you have your primary exit strategy to be acquired?
How many of you have exit strategy?
In other words, how are you going to get your money back out, and what are you going to do? How many of you will take your company public? Okay. How many of your exit strategy is to become part of another company and be acquired? Normally that runs about 50 to 70% of startups' exit strategy is to be acquired. So the most important thing to me is build a company to last, don't build it to be acquired.
Yes.
And you're much more valuable to the companies that look at acquiring you.
Yes.
So you want to build a company that is very close to the customers, that gives good financial return, never sell your customers something they don't need, build those relationships, and then when you look to be acquired, try to be acquired by a company that has a similar culture to you, that you will be proud of your employees being a part long term. But most companies won't go IPO. Way less than 1% of startups go to a publicly held company. And the majority of them over time will be acquired as the primary exit strategy of most VCs.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. Helping, guys? Yes, okay. All right, it's all about you, okay? So I know that in the audience also, we have large corporate executives. How many of you are from large corporations? Raise your hand. Corporations, large corporations, many.
Okay.
So my next question is how large corporations can be innovative or what they can do. I know that you bought out 180 companies, but not many of the corporations are doing that, right?
Yes.
So how they can be innovative? Is it M&A? Is it something else? Do they open up their incubation or what is it?
So I think we live in a time where 40% of the room that raised their hand being part of a large corporation will not be in business 10 years from now. The amount of disruption of even large companies is going to be unbelievably tough. How many of you are startups?
Startups. Raise your hand.
Yeah. 70% of you will not exist in 10 years. And so what this says is you've got to be realistic to focus on the market transition. And if there's not a market transition going on, then you're going to have a tough time surviving. You want to say, what is your differentiation? You want to build lasting relationships with your customers, and you have to move with speed and direction. So why are the large companies so interested in startups? Because large companies have trouble innovating. They have trouble changing the culture to move with speed. They know that they must change or they'll get left behind, and they're often looking to the small companies to help bring not just that innovation product capability, but a culture of innovation that allows you to move very quickly. And this is actually increasing, not decreasing. I don't know of a major corporation in the world that doesn't think about coming to Silicon Valley and saying, what are the major transitions going on that will really help them be more innovative? Now, as startups start to become more widespread, and remember, just 20 years ago, 90% of all venture capital went into the US.
Yes.
10 years ago, 80%. What do you think it is today? 53%. The speed of change is dramatic. So you're seeing startups occur as a startup nation, and you see major countries around the world refocusing on this in terms of direction. So what do the enterprise companies want and why are they here? To understand what is the next wave of innovation. Why do I talk to literally thousands of startups, whether it's in my current role or my prior role? Because they are so innovative, and they bring that innovation in combination for the large companies to be able to do it themselves and to do it with startups and to move with speed.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I'm going to actually move my conversation to a different direction.
Okay.
Let's talk about John's current career, okay? So he is actually a venture capitalist like me today.
Okay.
And he opened a firm called JC2 Ventures. Please visit the site. I really loved it as well. So why did you decide to become a venture capitalist?
Yes. Well, it'll be interesting because one of the things I'm searching for is to define what I really do. Because venture capital is just one of several things. It starts with the most fundamental thing of all. I knew I was going to retire from Cisco 10 years before I announced that I would. I wanted to make it a very smooth transition. I think the world would say we did a very good job, and Harvard Business School wrote a case study on how well we did versus most other tech companies. I then said, what do I want to do for at least the next 10 years of my life? And I love innovation. Mm-hmm. I love solving audacious problems, big problems that are coming at society. And I love to do that in a way that everybody wins. And so we formed JC2 Ventures to focus on disruptive new companies that would lead on innovation in their industry, that would do job creation, and job creation is important to me as actually the revenues, and that also would have the economic impact not just in Silicon Valley, but across all 50 states here and across countries around the world. And to be able to do that, and here's a role model, because my primary value to most of these companies is not the finances. If they're good, they can get the finances anywhere they want. It's how do you help them grow and scale? How do you become a strategic partner with the CEO to help her or him make these transitions? Because I've seen the movie so many times, and I've done a lot of things right and a lot of things wrong. And how do you coach them through this? And how do you help them develop their business strategy and vision? How do you help them build the culture of the company? How do you help them know when they need to change one of the founders and change them early enough that you keep them in a key role, but don't have to fire them and have them leave the company? How do you think about how do you get close to large companies and make that decision on this enterprise customer? What should you be doing there or not in terms of direction? And how do you set your company up to be successful in the long run in a way that everybody wins? What distribution channels do you go through, et cetera? So our value, and I'm honored to have done this with my son, who's came out of Liberty House startup, digital marketing, before that, Netflix, before that, Walmart.com.
Is he here?
Yeah, John is here and Shannon's here. If you'll stand
your
up,
hand.
guys. Where are you? All the way in the back.
John, come on in the front.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Shannon. And it is a dream to be able to really change this together. And so we're trying to do this in a way that no one else has done. I want to take the majority of my companies public. Why is that? Job creation. When you get acquired, and we acquired 180 of them at Cisco, the engineering ranks continued to grow, but we just blew their distribution through our sales organization, our finance organization, our services. So real job creation will come only if companies, in the long run, many more of them stay in the market themselves as opposed to be acquired. So I really am going the opposite way, because the safest exit for venture capitalists, have the company get sold, you make your return much quicker, and it's very predictable with very little legal liability. Taking them public is a little bit differently. So to answer your question, I want to change the world. I want to be a model for how do you do successful startups, how do you do successful startup nations and successful startup world. And I think we can raise all boats around the world. We can generate a lot more jobs, and we can change per capita income in a big way at the same time.
He's in trouble because all of you now want money from him, right? Right? Who wants money from John? Oh my God, you're in trouble. So what do they need to do to convince you to get your money? So before I do that, guys, one thing that John was very generous about, that he has decided to meet all the 28 regional champions. A round of applause for John. He is going to meet each of the regional champions privately today at lunch and talk to them one-on-one. No other speakers have done that, and really it's a great honor for us that he will do that. And those 28 companies will get the opportunity, but for everybody else, what they need to do to convince you?
Okay, gotcha. So what I look for is really a very predictable innovation model. And what I do is I look at what is the market transition you're going on. And if you're not in a market transition, both technology and business model changes, it's going to be very difficult for you to be successful. Now, you can be in that transition in a different way in Brazil in timing than in the US, or a different way in China than what's going on in Europe, but you have to have market transitions. The second thing I look for is the CEO. And they go hand in hand. If I don't believe the CEO can develop into a world-class CEO who wants to be coached, who wants to really be coached, that's the two combinations. I then, and it should be no surprise to you, I go look for their lighthouse customers. Who are the customers who would say, this company can really make a difference in my success rate in the area that I'm dealing with, whether that is the area of innovation around customer experience, or the data center, or computing moving to the edge, or artificial intelligence implementations of that. I then look at their leadership team, their venture capital investors, their advisors in terms of the skill sets, and I watch for a company that is in an inflection point 1 to 2 years out that has the potential to really grow at tremendous speed. I set audacious goals for the companies we combined. 45% growth in headcount. And notice I'm leading with jobs first. And you know what I'm saying here. You got to grow revenue way over 50% to support that headcount, including raises. I'm really looking for companies that can be one or two in their segment of the industry, that replicatable process that I did in my prior life. I'm looking for companies that really have strong cultures that fit into our values of the three founders at JC2 Ventures. And I look at organizations that truly want and have the courage to change the world and the ability to do that. So I look at areas like Internet of Things and do drones and also defense from drones. And in each of those areas, I look at how did that change, and we started off building typical drones, and that didn't work at Airware because that became a commodity.
I see.
It's how do you think of it as flying robotics with the Internet of Things and big data? It's how do you defend against drones violating airspace and potentially doing harm to people or doing spying. It's also about how do you catch these market transitions around Internet of Things, and let's talk about security. Every element in the room has to have how does security do this as you move from 1,000 connected devices to the internet when Cisco was found to 18 billion today to 500 billion. It's got to be architectures within that. I look at what artificial intelligence is able to do to really transform the business models, and the majority of my companies are using elements of artificial intelligence in it. I look at literally how do they think out of box and where is a segment that might shock you, like ag tech, which is one of the most underrepresented areas, and I'm into cricket farming. Robotic cricket farming to solve world hunger and to make crickets the next lobsters, if you will, as you go forward. And then I look at how computing moves to the edge, and that will change business models and technology capabilities, whether you're in a mining area where literally mines in the future will be run without humans. It'll be like an air traffic control center in the ground. And so I watch those transitions and get involved. Most companies, like I said earlier, when they look at what we bring, the money's nice, they're usually after the partnership, the operational experience and the scaling on it, and it's usually done at pretty good terms.
Perfect. So we'll talk about the cricket farming later. She actually bought some chips for us. I know that. So let's talk a little bit different things. So I think you talked about different technologies that you're investing in also and you're interested in.
Yes.
But so what is the next big thing you think? Because people are talking about different things.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's interesting. The fun part that you're seeing is every company in the world and every government is in a period of transition. The biggest thing that's going on is every company, every house, every car, every business is going to become digital. This Internet of Things that you often hear about hype, and everybody about the time they think it's all hype, then it's when it takes off, it's going to explode. And the ability really to leverage this to change business models. And you see progressive leaders that may surprise you. You talk about no entitlement in this new world. Do you know who the top 2 digitization countries in the world are that are also moving the fastest on the innovation? France and India. Who would have thought? France was the last place you'd put a business, do job growth. It's a great place to go for dinner and vacation, but to put employees over there, what are you thinking? And when I said over 3 years ago, France will become the startup nation in Europe, even my closest friends said, John, you get market transitions right, but this one you're wrong on. The US, the startups are at a 40-year low. The IPOs, and while it's increasing, will probably only be about 200 in the US this year. During the mid-90s, when we grew 22 million jobs in the 90s, last time America had a raise, 24% increase in per capita income, GDP growth of 34% over 8 years. Wouldn't you love to have that today? 706 companies went public in the mid-90s. If the job destruction is going to occur at the rate I just said, we must get startups running at 300 to 500 IPOs a year. And remember, the IPOs are like the tip of the iceberg. Less than 1% of the company's IPO. It's how healthy is your startup community and your small business below that. This is what is occurring in every part of the world. France, high-tech investments per year went from 143 4 years ago to 743 today, at a time the US is going down.
US is going down.
So it is about a startup world. The neat thing is I'm trying to do this on a global basis and coach companies. So while it's nice for our own investments, I'm not a VC in the words that you would talk about it. We're just completely committed to a startup world and try to play a key role in both as a role model, helping government leaders like Macron do that. I'm the French Global High-Tech Ambassador. Can you picture an American having a French high-tech global ambassador?
Maybe not.
No, but what I'm saying is this is how out of box other countries are thinking. And for the first time when I talk to the startups like you around the world, other than your accent, the ideas are remarkably good, regardless of where you are. So it is about speed and execution, and do the governments grasp this in Brazil, in Germany, in China, in Australia, in Singapore to really foster and have a major program for a startup nation?
Perfect. This is Startup World Cup also is all about globalization, right?
Yeah.
And global startups coming here. And when I put it together a year ago, I remember that entrepreneurs from Africa told me that there is nothing to hook up Africa and the US. I have entrepreneurs coming from Australia telling me that there is nothing hooking up Australia and Silicon Valley. So I wanted to put something together, and this is the Startup World Cup, guys.
Yes.
28 regions from all continents are participating, and you have people from every single country here.
Yes.
Just needed a vision, and then we actually executed it, and people like yourself have supported this platform, and you are here. That's the reason, right?
And that's why I'm here, because I believe in what you're doing.
So I'm
And
gonna
I'll
go
learn
to-
a lot. This will shock you. I will learn as much today as I give. I should feel guilty about that. I do not. It's a chance for me to learn from you, and I learn each day from the startups that I deal with. My average day is probably talking to 5 or 6 different individual sessions of startups.
So I know that you're thinking out of the box.
Yes, and you must. You know, many people would criticize me, perhaps I'm too ambitious, I move too fast, I take too much risk. I don't think so. My only regrets is I didn't take more risk. I didn't dream bigger. And with that, I know there are going to be failures and setbacks along the way. Now, when you think about this, and back to the concepts that we were on earlier, are you more a product of your successes or the challenges and setbacks you had in life? Exactly. And many companies forget that. Jack Welch taught me. He said, John, you're never going to have a great company until you have a near-death experience. In 2001, I went from some people's view, the top CEO in the world, to people saying, should I have my job? At the end of 2001, he called me up and said, John, you now have a great company. I said, Jack, it doesn't feel like it. My shareholders are very disappointed. People are questioning, can I lead this company? Even some of my most loyal employees are having questions. And he said, you will never have a great company at Cisco until you go through this. And he was right. He would say that was my best leadership year. I'm not so sure I agree with him. It was the most painful by far. But the point that I'm making is you have to be able to not just do things that are exciting, but how, when the inevitable setbacks come from your company, realize you will never have a great company regardless of size until you deal with those going forward. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. So let's talk about that startup you invested, that chips company. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I do. When you
I
think
think we
about where
have-
this is going, one of the things
we
that
have
I
some
do
chips.
pretty effectively is tell stories to illustrate a point. And I'm writing a book, which will be out in the fall,
Yes.
called Connecting the Dots. And it's about lessons for a startup digital world of the future. And I will share many of these. And I'm writing it not to talk about this, but to share the lessons, both successes and mistakes made. And if you want to follow what I'm doing, such as where you're leading me, in changing global world hunger, just follow me on Twitter, JT Chambers. But major thing is, you've got to have the courage to think out of the box. So when I think about what I'm doing, about the time people get nervous that my dreams are too big and that what we're trying to do, the three of us as founders, might be too ambitious, then I get people outside their comfort zone. One of the most underutilized market transitions in the world is ag tech. And it's not hyped hardly at all. And I'm at the World Economic Forum, and a guy by the name of Mohammed Ashur basically had won the $1 million prize like you're giving here at the Clinton Global Initiative, at the World Economic Forum session, Clinton Global Initiative 3 years before. And I sat beside him, and first thing he said is, John, would you invest? And I said, in insects? I don't think so. And he said, John, we're going to solve world hunger. And I kind of went, yeah, right. And then when I watched how smart Muhammad was and how crisp he was, I realized that here was a chance to solve world hunger with the primary protein a decade from now being from insects, that you could do it at 1/7 the environmental impact that basically having meat or other areas do, that you could do it in a much cleaner form in terms of the quality. And so how many of you believe in taking risks in this room? You all do, right? Let's see a show of hands. Risk takers? Okay, we will see. So we're going to pass out crickets.
Do you have the chips?
And crickets will be something your kids will love. But my question is, do you have the courage yourself? Now, how many of you are willing to try crickets here today? Just hold up your hand. Your kids are going to love it, by the way. But the point that I'm making is, have the courage to make the changes. He has invented literally a Internet of Things, robotic cricket farming capability that has the chance to change world hunger. And watch, there's a nice thing there. But also, the crickets, remember lobsters used to be a punishment. Even you could not give lobsters to prisoners in Massachusetts more than 3 days a week because it was cruel and unusual punishment. So we're going to make crickets the next form of lobsters. Mm-hmm. So there's going to be passed around the room. Just take a second. Like a crunchy potato chip, isn't it?
Yeah.
I love watching the face here. And so we're
It is
pass it
tasty,
out.
honest.
But I got it caught in my throat.
You have Diet Coke here.
Yeah. But it's like challenging your own team to think out of the box, to not take yourself too serious. You don't eat potato chips without something to drink after them either. But to think what is possible. And so maybe on my closing thoughts here today, I want you to dream bigger. If you're comfortable with your plans for your startup, you're not thinking big enough picture. If you think you continue to do the same thing or the right thing too long, you're already in trouble. If you're not building off a market transition, you're already behind. So I'm encouraging you to dream and say what can really be done in terms of the direction. To be ambitious, to say how do you do this different than anyone else has done? And when you're successful, I'm going to agree with my prior speakers, have the courage to give back both to your employees and also give back and become a great corporate social responsibility person. It's been a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you so much, everyone. A round of applause for John.
Thank you. Thank you.
Guys, thank you so much. That was
Pleasure.
amazing. Especially as a creator of a company called The Disruptive Movement myself, I just really, really, really appreciate everything that you had talked about with
You really did.
positive disruption. Are we doing it?
Oh, yeah,
What are
the
we doing
crickets
today?
we're going to see. Are you going to try them?
What is it?
It's crickets.
Oh, I've heard it. Okay, I haven't done it yet, but I've
Okay.
said because I'm all about disrupting
So
movements.
you're about disruption?
I am.
Now, one thing, you've got to have a glass of water afterwards, because if you don't
Okay.
have a glass of water, it's like
I
potato
heard
chips.
that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Here we go. You ready for this, guys?
Yep.
You got your cameras out. Remember, you can post this on for the Hawaii trip. We're gonna win. Who's gonna win? Win? Nobody wants to win the free Hawaii trip.
Hawaii trip, yeah.
I've been posting like crazy because I want to win. Okay, here we go.
Here we go. All right. Now, what you do when you're on stage with a friend is you give her that extra minute to finish chewing on the crickets. So I'll talk for a second so she can finish that and swallow it as we go forward. But I do want you to realize you will change the world. You are our future. And have the courage to do it and to make
yeah.
differences.
Heck yeah.
It's an honor. Thank you for being such a
you
great sport.
so much. I love
Thank
that
you very
kind of
much,
stuff.
John.
I literally
I have a little gift for
do
you.
that all the
Thank you.
time.
Please.
Woo! Those are good.
A backless dress and some beat-up sneaks. My discotheque